Captain Sarah Chin adjusts her headset as the emergency broadcast crackles through the cockpit of Flight 447. The Boeing 737 sits heavy on the runway at Denver International Airport, its engines humming with nervous energy. Through the windscreen, she watches military vehicles racing across the tarmac while emergency lights paint the terminal in harsh reds and blues. Her co-pilot, Marcus Rivera, frantically checks weather patterns on his tablet, but Sarah knows this storm isn't meteorological. The initial reports had been dismissed as isolated incidents. A few violent attacks in downtown Denver, some unusual hospital admissions, nothing that would typically ground commercial flights. But in the past hour, everything changed. The emergency services frequency buzzed with increasingly desperate calls about aggressive individuals displaying superhuman strength and an apparent immunity to pain. Sarah had been flying for 15 years, weathering everything from severe turbulence to engine failures, but the tension in the control tower's voice when they cleared her for immediate takeoff sent chills down her spine. Behind her, the passenger cabin holds 93 souls, mostly business travelers and families returning from weekend trips. They board with typical travel complaints about delayed flights and cramped seating, completely unaware that the city below them is beginning to tear itself apart. Flight attendant Janet Morrison moves through the aisles with practiced efficiency, helping passengers stow their carry-on luggage while occasionally glancing toward the cockpit with worried eyes. She's worked with Sarah long enough to recognize when something is seriously wrong. The control tower's voice cuts through the static again, more urgent this time. Flight 447, you are cleared for immediate departure. Climb to 35,000 feet and maintain heading 270. Avoid all airspace over metropolitan areas until further notice. Sarah acknowledges the transmission, her fingers dancing across the instrument panel as she begins the takeoff sequence. Through her peripheral vision, she notices movement near the terminal building. Groups of people seem to be running, though whether they're fleeing from something or pursuing it remains unclear from this distance. Marcus leans forward, adjusting his glasses as he squints at the scene below. Sarah, look at Gate 12. His voice carries an edge of disbelief. Near the jetway, a cluster of airport security personnel appears to be engaged in some kind of altercation. But as Sarah watches, one of the security officers suddenly lurches backward, his movements jerky and unnatural. The group disperses quickly, some running toward the terminal while others seem to be giving chase with an unsettling, relentless gait. The engines reach full power, and Sarah feels the familiar sensation of the aircraft straining against the brakes. She's about to release them when her radio crackles with an emergency transmission from ground control. All aircraft, this is Denver ground. We have reports of aggressive individuals breaching the security perimeter. Multiple terminals are being evacuated. Flight 447, you are go for immediate departure. Sarah releases the brakes, and the heavy aircraft begins its acceleration down the runway. The familiar routine of takeoff feels different now, charged with an urgency that makes her pulse quicken. As the plane lifts off, she catches a glimpse of the terminal's main entrance. The glass doors appear to be shattered, and people are streaming out in all directions. Some move with the purposeful speed of those fleeing danger, while others pursue them with an odd, shambling determination that doesn't look quite human. Climbing through 5,000 feet, Sarah tries to reach air traffic control for their assigned route to Chicago. The radio frequency is chaos, filled with overlapping transmissions from multiple aircraft requesting emergency diversions. Pilots report unusual ground activity at airports across Colorado and Wyoming, with several facilities declaring temporary closures due to security incidents. The term seems inadequate for whatever is happening below them. At 10,000 feet, Marcus receives a text message on his personal phone. His face goes pale as he reads it. Sarah, my wife is in downtown Denver. She says people are attacking each other in the streets. She's locked in her office building with several co-workers, and they can hear screaming from the floors below. He tries calling her, but the phone networks appear to be overwhelmed. Sarah maintains her focus on flying the aircraft while processing this information. Her training has prepared her for mechanical failures, severe weather, and even potential hijacking scenarios, but nothing in the aviation manual covers what to do when civilization itself begins to collapse below them. The radio continues to buzz with increasingly frantic communications from ground control centers across the region, each reporting similar incidents of violent chaos spreading through major population centers. As Flight 447 continues its climb toward cruising altitude, Sarah realizes this may not be a routine flight to Chicago. The world they left behind on the runway is rapidly becoming something else entirely, and she's responsible for protecting 93 innocent people from a threat that none of them yet understand. The true horror of their situation is only beginning to unfold. At 35,000 feet, Flight 447 cruises through clear skies while the world below descends into chaos. Sarah maintains radio contact with various air traffic control centers, but each transmission brings increasingly disturbing news. Chicago O'Hare has suspended all incoming flights indefinitely due to what officials are calling civil unrest. Kansas City reports similar problems, with their control tower going silent mid-transmission 20 minutes ago. The pattern is spreading across the Midwest like a contagion, and Sarah begins to understand that what started in Denver is far from an isolated incident. Marcus continues trying to reach his wife, but the cell towers appear to be overwhelmed or damaged. His hands shake slightly as he monitors the flight instruments, occasionally glancing at his silent phone with desperate hope. The passengers remain largely unaware of the crisis, though some have begun noticing the unusual radio chatter and the crew's increasingly tense demeanor. Janet moves through the cabin with forced cheerfulness, deflecting questions about their route while privately sharing worried glances with the other flight attendants. The first real sign of trouble comes from passenger 14A, a businessman named David Kellerman who had been working on his laptop since takeoff. He suddenly looks up from his screen, his face pale with shock. "Excuse me," he calls to Janet, his voice carrying across several rows. "I'm getting news alerts here. There are reports of mass violence in Denver, Chicago, and St. Louis. They're saying people are attacking each other in the streets." Other passengers begin checking their phones and tablets, and within minutes, a wave of anxious murmurs sweeps through the cabin. Sarah can hear the growing concern from the passenger compartment, but her immediate focus is on the radio. The FAA has issued a nationwide ground stop for all commercial aviation, effective immediately. No aircraft are to land at any major airport until further notice. The directive comes through with bureaucratic precision, but Sarah can hear the underlying panic in the controller's voice. She's never heard a nationwide ground stop issued for anything other than the most extreme circumstances. From her position at cruising altitude, Sarah can see the landscape below stretching endlessly in all directions. Somewhere down there, major cities are experiencing what can only be described as a complete breakdown of social order. The radio frequency crackles with reports from other aircraft, pilots sharing fragmentary information about smoke rising from urban areas and unusual movement patterns visible from the air. Flight 292 from Seattle reports seeing massive traffic jams with abandoned vehicles scattered across highways. Flight 156 from Boston describes what appears to be fires burning unchecked in several metropolitan areas. The most chilling transmission comes from Flight 78, a smaller regional jet that had been attempting to land in Minneapolis. The pilot's voice is strained and breathless as he reports being waved off by ground control just before touchdown. "They told us the airport is compromised," he says. "We could see people running across the runways. Not normal evacuation procedures. They were being chased by others who moved differently, almost like they were injured or sick." Ground control went silent after that. Sarah makes the decision to maintain their current altitude and heading while gathering more information. Fuel consumption at cruising altitude is optimal, buying them time to understand their options. She instructs Janet to make a careful announcement to the passengers, explaining that they're monitoring weather conditions and may need to divert to an alternate airport. It's a standard enough explanation that most passengers accept it, though the more observant ones notice the crew's increasing anxiety. Marcus receives a text message from his brother in Phoenix, one of the few communications to get through the overwhelmed networks. The message is brief but terrifying: "Stay away from cities. Something is very wrong. People are attacking each other. Military is mobilizing. Find somewhere safe and wait it out." The text cuts off abruptly, and subsequent messages fail to send. As Flight 447 continues its journey through increasingly hostile airspace, Sarah begins to realize that they're not just dealing with a temporary crisis that will resolve itself. The scope and speed of the breakdown suggest something far more catastrophic. Radio communications with ground control become sporadic and eventually cease entirely across large portions of the country. The silence from below is more frightening than any distress call could be. The passengers sense that something is fundamentally wrong, though they don't yet understand the full scope of the crisis. Sarah knows she must make a decision soon about where to attempt landing, but every option seems to carry enormous risk. The fuel gauges show they have perhaps 3 hours of flying time remaining, and somewhere below them, the familiar world they knew when they took off is rapidly disappearing. The responsibility for 93 lives weighs heavily on her shoulders as she contemplates a future that none of them are prepared for. With fuel levels dropping steadily, Sarah faces an impossible decision. The flight management computer shows they have approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes of fuel remaining, but every potential landing site within their range is either reporting severe disturbances or has gone completely silent. She spreads aeronautical charts across her lap, marking off airports one by one as radio reports confirm they're either closed or compromised. The red X's on her chart multiply like a spreading infection, mirroring the chaos consuming the ground below. Marcus attempts to establish contact with smaller regional airports, hoping that rural facilities might have escaped the widespread breakdown affecting major cities. His efforts yield mixed results. Topeka Regional Airport responds briefly, reporting that they're operating with minimal staff but can accommodate emergency landings. However, before Marcus can request clearance, the transmission cuts off mid-sentence, replaced by an eerie silence that speaks volumes about the rapidly deteriorating situation. The passengers have moved beyond mere concern into barely contained panic. David Kellerman stands in the aisle, his voice rising as he addresses the cabin. "We have a right to know what's happening down there. My company has offices in 6 major cities and I can't reach anyone. The news feeds are showing complete chaos." Other passengers voice similar concerns, their voices overlapping in a crescendo of fear and confusion. Janet and the other flight attendants struggle to maintain order, but their usual authority seems inadequate against the growing realization that they're trapped in a metal tube above an increasingly hostile world. Sarah makes the difficult decision to address the passengers directly. Her voice comes through the intercom system with forced calm, though she knows that trained ears can detect the underlying tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Chin. Due to severe weather conditions and air traffic congestion, we're currently holding at altitude while we evaluate our landing options. We have sufficient fuel for several more hours of flight, and we're working closely with air traffic control to find the safest possible destination. Please remain seated and follow the instructions of your flight attendants." The announcement does little to calm the cabin. Several passengers have managed to connect to news websites through the aircraft's limited Wi-Fi, and the reports they're sharing paint a picture of unprecedented nationwide chaos. Videos show people attacking each other with savage intensity, their movements erratic and their behavior completely inhuman. Emergency services appear overwhelmed, with many cities reporting complete communication blackouts. The federal government has issued conflicting statements, ranging from calls for calm to warnings about avoiding populated areas entirely. From her pilot's seat, Sarah can see smoke rising from what appears to be St. Louis in the distance. The city spreads across the horizon like a dark stain, with multiple fires sending columns of black smoke into the afternoon sky. No aircraft are visible in the typically busy airspace around Lambert Field, and radio attempts to contact their control tower yield only static. The sight of a major metropolitan area apparently abandoned by aviation sends a chill through her professional composure. The first sign of real trouble aboard Flight 447 comes from row 23. A middle-aged woman named Patricia Hendricks begins complaining of severe headaches and nausea. Initially dismissed as motion sickness, her condition rapidly deteriorates. She becomes increasingly agitated, speaking incoherently about voices in her head and claiming that the other passengers are plotting against her. Her husband tries to calm her, but she responds with unexpected aggression, clawing at his face and screaming about needing to stop the spread. Janet rushes to assist, but Patricia's behavior becomes increasingly erratic. She exhibits unusual strength, requiring 3 adults to restrain her while she thrashes violently in her seat. Her pupils are dilated and she seems to be running a high fever. Most disturbing is her apparent inability to recognize her own husband, treating him as a complete stranger despite 30 years of marriage. The other passengers watch in horror as the woman they chatted with pleasantly during boarding transforms into something barely recognizable as human. Sarah hears the commotion from the cockpit and realizes that whatever is happening on the ground may have followed them into the sky. The timing suggests that Patricia may have been exposed to something before boarding, with the infection now manifesting at the worst possible moment. With no medical facilities available and no safe place to land, they're trapped in a flying metal tube with what appears to be the same contagion that's destroying civilization below them. Marcus monitors the fuel situation with growing alarm. Even if they could find a safe airport, they're rapidly approaching the point of no return. Small regional airports in rural areas represent their only hope, but each radio call brings either silence or reports of chaos spreading even to the most remote locations. The infection appears to be moving faster than anyone anticipated, and Flight 447 is running out of both time and options. The realization that they might not find any safe harbor begins to settle over the crew like a suffocating blanket, while in the cabin, Patricia's condition continues to deteriorate in ways that suggest their nightmare has only just begun. Patricia Hendricks' condition deteriorates rapidly, transforming from concerning to terrifying within minutes. Her fevered muttering becomes increasingly violent, filled with threats against the other passengers whom she no longer recognizes as fellow humans. The restraints fashioned from seatbelts and blankets prove inadequate as her strength seems to increase with her agitation. Her husband Richard pleads with her, tears streaming down his face as he tries to reach some remnant of the woman he married, but Patricia responds to his voice with snarling hostility, as if his familiar presence triggers some primal rage. Janet coordinates with the other flight attendants to establish a containment protocol, but they're operating without any training for this unprecedented situation. They manage to clear the surrounding seats, moving passengers to other areas of the aircraft while maintaining as much calm as possible. However, the confined space of the airplane cabin makes true isolation impossible, and Patricia's increasingly inhuman sounds carry throughout the passenger compartment, creating an atmosphere of mounting terror. The situation escalates when Patricia breaks free from her restraints with a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength that defies her middle-aged frame. She lunges at the nearest passenger, a young college student named Mike Torres, her fingernails raking across his arm and drawing blood. The attack is swift and vicious, driven by what appears to be pure predatory instinct rather than any human emotion. Mike cries out in pain and shock, stumbling backward into the narrow aisle as other passengers scramble away in panic. Sarah hears the commotion and realizes she must make an immediate decision about emergency landing procedures. She attempts to contact any available airport, broadcasting on emergency frequencies while Marcus frantically searches for options on their charts. The response is either silence or brief transmissions confirming that ground facilities are either overrun or abandoned. One particularly chilling communication comes from a small airport in Nebraska, where the tower operator whispers urgently before the transmission cuts off, "Don't land here. They're inside the terminal. They're inside everywhere." In the cabin, the passengers work together to subdue Patricia, but her behavior has become completely animalistic. She bites and claws at anyone within reach, showing no recognition of pain when she injures herself in the struggle. Most disturbing is her apparent inability to communicate beyond guttural growls and snarls, as if the infection has stripped away everything that made her human. The other passengers watch in horror as they realize this could be their fate as well. Richard Hendricks sits in stunned silence, his wife's blood under his fingernails from trying to restrain her. The psychological impact of watching a loved one transform into something monstrous creates an additional layer of trauma that ripples through the cabin. Several passengers begin experiencing panic attacks, while others retreat into themselves, unable to process the reality of their situation. The normal social dynamics of air travel have completely broken down, replaced by a survival mentality that prioritizes self-preservation above all else. Marcus notices a disturbing change in Mike Torres, the student who was scratched by Patricia. Within 30 minutes of the attack, Mike begins showing similar symptoms: elevated temperature, disorientation, and increasing agitation. His girlfriend, Sarah Mitchell, tries to comfort him, but Mike's responses become increasingly erratic and hostile. The rapid progression of symptoms suggests that whatever is causing this transformation spreads quickly through direct contact with infected bodily fluids. The crew faces an impossible moral dilemma. They must protect the uninfected passengers while dealing with individuals who are rapidly losing their humanity. Traditional medical protocols are useless against a condition that appears to be more than just a disease. Patricia and Mike seem to be driven by an aggressive instinct that makes them dangerous to everyone around them, but they were fellow passengers just hours ago, with families and lives that extended far beyond this aircraft. Sarah makes the agonizing decision to isolate the infected passengers in the rear of the aircraft, using the galley area as a makeshift quarantine zone. The task requires the cooperation of several brave passengers who help move Patricia and the increasingly unstable Mike to the back of the plane. The process is dangerous and chaotic, with both infected individuals fighting against the restraints and showing no recognition of the people trying to help them. As the hours pass, the fuel situation becomes critical. Sarah calculates that they have less than 90 minutes of flying time remaining, but every potential landing site either fails to respond to radio calls or explicitly warns aircraft to stay away. The infected passengers in the rear of the aircraft have become increasingly violent, their sounds carrying through the cabin and creating a constant reminder of what awaits anyone who becomes infected. The psychological pressure on the remaining passengers intensifies as they realize that their aircraft has become a microcosm of the larger catastrophe unfolding below. They're trapped in a metal tube with infected individuals running out of fuel with no safe place to land. The crew maintains what order they can, but the reality of their situation is becoming undeniable. They're not just passengers on a delayed flight anymore. They're survivors in a world that no longer offers sanctuary, forced to make decisions that will determine who lives and who dies in the confined space of Flight 447. The infection spreads with terrifying efficiency through the confined space of Flight 447. Within 2 hours of Patricia's initial attack, 4 more passengers display the telltale symptoms: severe fever, disorientation, and increasingly violent behavior. The pattern is consistent and horrifying. Each person transitions from concerned passenger to aggressive predator within 30 to 40 minutes of exposure. Janet coordinates the remaining flight attendants in a desperate attempt to maintain boundaries between infected and uninfected areas, but the aircraft's narrow aisles make containment nearly impossible. Sarah receives an unexpected transmission on the emergency frequency, cutting through the static that has dominated their communications for the past hour. The voice belongs to Colonel James Martinez at Cheyenne Mountain Air Force Station, a remote military installation in Colorado. Flight 447, this is Cheyenne Mountain Base. We have been monitoring your situation and are prepared to offer emergency landing clearance. Our facility is secure and equipped to handle quarantine procedures. The transmission provides the first glimmer of hope they've had since the crisis began, but Sarah knows that landing with infected passengers presents enormous risks to any ground facility. The infected passengers in the rear galley have become increasingly coordinated in their attempts to break free from their restraints. Patricia, Mike, and the others seem to communicate through a series of guttural sounds and aggressive gestures, almost as if the infection has created some form of primitive pack behavior. Their combined efforts to escape the improvised quarantine area require constant vigilance from the uninfected passengers who have volunteered to guard them. The psychological toll of watching former fellow travelers transform into something barely human weighs heavily on everyone involved. Marcus monitors the fuel gauges with growing desperation. They have less than 40 minutes of flying time remaining, making Cheyenne Mountain their only viable option regardless of the risks involved. The base's remote location in the Colorado mountains means they would have to navigate challenging terrain while dealing with infected passengers who seem to become more aggressive as fuel levels drop. The aircraft's engines create vibrations that appear to agitate the infected individuals, causing them to throw themselves against their restraints with increasing violence. The situation deteriorates further when Richard Hendricks, driven by grief and denial, attempts to reach his infected wife in the quarantine area. Despite warnings from the crew and other passengers, he pushes past the barricades, convinced that he can somehow reach the woman he married. Patricia's response is swift and brutal. She attacks him with the same predatory instinct she's shown toward strangers, biting deep into his shoulder before he can retreat. The attack shatters any remaining illusions about the infected retaining human consciousness or emotion. Sarah makes the agonizing decision to accept Cheyenne Mountain's offer while implementing emergency protocols that prioritize the survival of uninfected passengers. She instructs the remaining healthy individuals to secure themselves in the forward cabin while preparing for what may be a crash landing rather than a controlled approach. The infected passengers' increasing violence makes normal landing procedures impossible, as their thrashing threatens to affect the aircraft's balance and control systems. The descent toward Cheyenne Mountain becomes a race against time, fuel, and the infected passengers' attempts to break free from their restraints. Sarah can hear the chaos in the cabin behind her as the remaining flight attendants and volunteers struggle to maintain the barriers between infected and uninfected areas. The mountain terrain below offers few options for emergency landing sites, making precision approach essential despite the deteriorating conditions aboard the aircraft. Colonel Martinez provides approach vectors while warning Sarah about the base's defensive perimeter. Flight 447, be advised that we have shoot-to-kill orders for any infected individuals who attempt to breach our security zone. Your passengers will be processed through quarantine protocols before being cleared for entry to the secure areas. The military's matter-of-fact approach to the crisis provides a stark reminder of how quickly normal civilization has collapsed in the face of this unprecedented threat. As Flight 447 begins its final approach, Sarah realizes that even reaching the ground safely may not guarantee survival. The infected passengers have become increasingly violent during the descent, their sounds carrying through the cabin like the howls of wild animals. Several more passengers show early symptoms of infection, creating a growing population of individuals who pose immediate danger to the survivors. The fuel warning lights illuminate the cockpit in urgent red, indicating that they have perhaps 5 minutes of flying time remaining. The mountain peaks surrounding Cheyenne Mountain Air Force Station loom ahead through the cockpit windscreen, their snow-covered slopes offering both salvation and potential destruction. Sarah grips the controls tightly, knowing that the next few minutes will determine whether Flight 447 becomes a rescue story or a catastrophic addition to the growing list of casualties in humanity's fight against an enemy that was once human itself. The approach to Cheyenne Mountain Air Force Station becomes a nightmare of precision flying under impossible conditions. Sarah fights to maintain control as the infected passengers in the rear galley break through their restraints with coordinated fury. The sound of splintering plastic and tearing fabric mingles with inhuman snarls as Patricia, Mike, and the others work together to destroy the barriers that separate them from the uninfected survivors. Their pack-like behavior has evolved beyond simple aggression into tactical cooperation, making them far more dangerous than individual infected persons. Marcus frantically calculates their glide path while monitoring fuel levels that have dropped into the emergency reserve range. The aircraft's engines begin to sputter intermittently, sending vibrations through the airframe that seem to further agitate the infected passengers. Through the cockpit windscreen, the military base appears as a cluster of lights against the darkening mountain landscape, but Sarah can see military vehicles positioned around the perimeter with their weapons trained skyward. The sight of surface-to-air missile batteries serves as a stark reminder that they're approaching a facility prepared to shoot down aircraft if necessary. The infected passengers breach the galley barriers with explosive violence, spilling into the main cabin where the remaining survivors have barricaded themselves behind a wall of seats and service carts. Janet leads the defense, wielding a fire extinguisher as a weapon while other passengers use whatever they can find to create distance from the advancing infected. The narrow confines of the aircraft amplify every sound of the struggle, creating a cacophony of terror that reaches the cockpit despite Sarah's efforts to focus on the landing approach. Colonel Martinez's voice crackles through the radio with urgent updates about the base's status. Flight 447, be advised that we have multiple security breaches at ground level. Unknown hostiles have infiltrated the outer perimeter. We are implementing lockdown protocols and may not be able to provide ground support upon landing. The transmission cuts off abruptly, replaced by the sound of automatic weapons fire and shouting voices. Sarah realizes that their intended refuge may be as compromised as everywhere else they've tried to reach. The fuel warning alarms fill the cockpit with urgent beeping as the engines begin to fail. Sarah has no choice but to continue the approach, knowing that they lack the fuel for any alternative plan. The mountain terrain below offers no suitable emergency landing sites, making the air base their only option despite the deteriorating security situation. She adjusts the aircraft's configuration for maximum glide efficiency while Marcus attempts to re-establish contact with the control tower. Behind them, the battle for survival intensifies as the infected passengers overwhelm the survivors' defenses. Richard Hendricks, now showing advanced symptoms of infection from his wife's attack, turns on the people who had tried to help him just hours earlier. His transformation from grieving husband to predatory threat exemplifies the complete breakdown of human bonds that the infection causes. The survivors are forced to retreat further forward, abandoning the main cabin to the infected while seeking refuge in the aircraft's forward sections. Marcus suddenly cries out in pain as one of the infected passengers, a businessman named Craig Wilson, breaks through the cockpit door. The security barrier that should have protected the flight crew proves inadequate against the infected's enhanced strength and single-minded determination. Craig's attack is swift and brutal, his teeth sinking into Marcus's neck before Sarah can react. The co-pilot's scream of agony mingles with the sound of failing engines as Sarah realizes she must fly the aircraft alone while her colleague transforms into the enemy. The runway lights of Cheyenne Mountain appear ahead, but Sarah can see muzzle flashes and explosions around the base perimeter. The military facility that represented their salvation is clearly under siege, with infected individuals streaming across the defensive positions. The radio frequency fills with desperate calls for reinforcement and reports of casualties among the base personnel. Sarah understands that they're not landing at a secure facility but rather adding to the chaos of an already compromised position. With Marcus writhing in his seat as the infection takes hold, Sarah must complete the landing approach single-handedly while infected passengers claw at the cockpit door behind her. The fuel gauges read empty, the engines are failing, and their destination is under attack. The mountain peaks surrounding the base seem to close in around them like the jaws of a trap, offering no escape from the horror that has consumed both the aircraft and the world below. Sarah grips the controls with white-knuckled determination, knowing that the next few minutes will determine whether any of them survive to see another dawn in a world that no longer resembles the one they knew when they took off from Denver. Flight 447 crashes into the mountain runway with devastating force, the aircraft's belly scraping across concrete as Sarah fights to maintain control without engine power. The impact throws everyone forward violently, temporarily stunning both infected and uninfected passengers alike. Metal screams against stone as the aircraft slides sideways, its right wing shearing off against a concrete barrier before the fuselage finally comes to rest in a twisted heap of aluminum and debris. Emergency lighting flickers sporadically throughout the cabin, casting eerie shadows over the carnage within. Sarah awakens hanging upside down in her pilot's seat, blood streaming from a gash on her forehead. The cockpit is filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning electronics. Behind her, Marcus hangs motionless in his restraints, his neck bent at an unnatural angle. The infection that had begun to transform him was stopped by the crash, but the sight of her dead colleague serves as a grim reminder of how quickly their situation deteriorated. She unbuckles herself and drops to what was once the ceiling, her training taking over as she assesses the aircraft's condition. The passenger cabin has become a hellscape of twisted metal and scattered debris. Several seats have broken free from their moorings, creating a maze of obstacles that separates survivors from the infected. The crash has temporarily subdued the infected passengers, but Sarah can hear stirring from the wreckage as they begin to recover from the impact. Their enhanced resilience means they'll likely survive injuries that would incapacitate normal humans, making them an immediate threat once they regain consciousness. Janet's voice calls out from somewhere in the wreckage, weak but determined. "Captain Chin. We have survivors in the forward section." Sarah makes her way through the debris, stepping carefully over broken glass and twisted metal. She finds Janet trapped under a collapsed overhead compartment, her leg clearly broken but her spirit unbroken. Around her, 6 other passengers have survived the crash with varying degrees of injury, including David Kellerman and a young mother named Lisa Santos who clutches her unconscious teenage daughter. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoes from outside the aircraft, accompanied by shouting voices and the distinctive growl of infected individuals. Through a cracked window, Sarah can see the military base's perimeter in chaos. Soldiers in combat gear are fighting desperate battles against waves of infected personnel who move with the same coordinated pack behavior they witnessed aboard the aircraft. The base's defensive positions are being overrun, with infected individuals pouring through breaches in the security fence. Sarah helps free Janet from the debris while organizing the other survivors. The aircraft's emergency exits are either blocked by wreckage or damaged beyond use, leaving them trapped inside a metal tomb with infected passengers who are beginning to stir. The crash has bought them time, but Patricia, Mike and the others are already showing signs of movement, their inhuman resilience allowing them to recover faster than the uninfected survivors. The discovery that shocks Sarah the most comes when she searches the wreckage for useful supplies. Hidden among the aircraft's emergency equipment, she finds a classified military briefcase that must have belonged to one of the passengers. Inside are documents detailing something called Project Lazarus, a biological weapons research program that was apparently being conducted at various military installations, including Cheyenne Mountain. The papers describe experiments with a pathogen designed to enhance human aggression and pain tolerance, but the research notes indicate the program lost containment several days ago. The horrifying realization hits Sarah like a physical blow. The infection that's destroying civilization isn't a natural outbreak but the result of military experiments gone wrong. The documents detail how the pathogen was designed to create enhanced soldiers, but the researchers lost control when the subjects began exhibiting increased aggression toward all humans, not just designated enemies. The infection spreads through bodily fluids and has a rapid onset time, exactly matching what they've witnessed aboard Flight 447. As the infected passengers begin to fully recover from the crash, Sarah faces an impossible choice. The military base outside is clearly overrun, making it unsuitable as a refuge. The aircraft is damaged beyond repair, and several survivors are too injured to move quickly. The documents in the briefcase contain information about other research facilities and potential countermeasures, but reaching them would require abandoning the most vulnerable survivors to almost certain death. The sound of approaching infected individuals grows louder, both from within the aircraft and from the base perimeter. Sarah can see movement through the smoke-filled cabin as Patricia and the others begin to navigate the wreckage with predatory determination. The crash has scattered them temporarily, but their pack instincts are already reasserting themselves as they orient toward the scent of uninfected humans. Sarah grips the classified documents tightly, knowing that the information they contain might be humanity's only hope for survival, even as the infected close in around them in the twisted remains of Flight 447. Sarah makes the agonizing decision to prioritize the classified documents over the most severely injured survivors. The Project Lazarus files contain detailed information about research facilities across the country, including a supposedly secure laboratory in Montana that was developing countermeasures to the pathogen. With Janet's broken leg and Lisa Santos's unconscious daughter, moving the entire group would be impossible, but the information in the briefcase could save millions of lives if it reaches the right people. The infected passengers have fully recovered from the crash and are methodically searching the wreckage for survivors. Patricia moves through the debris with predatory grace, her injuries from the impact already healing at an accelerated rate. The documents describe this enhanced recovery as one of the pathogen's intended effects, designed to create soldiers who could continue fighting despite severe wounds. What the researchers didn't anticipate was how the enhanced aggression would override all other human instincts, creating perfect predators with no loyalty to their former species. David Kellerman volunteers to stay behind with the injured survivors, armed with pieces of twisted metal from the aircraft's frame. His sacrifice allows Sarah, Janet, and Lisa to escape through a gap in the fuselage while he creates a distraction by engaging the infected passengers in desperate combat. His screams echo through the mountain air as Sarah leads the remaining survivors toward the base's motor pool, where she hopes to find a working vehicle. The military base resembles a war zone, with bodies scattered across the compound and buildings burning unchecked. The infected personnel move in coordinated groups, their pack behavior allowing them to overwhelm defensive positions with tactical precision. Sarah realizes that the pathogen doesn't just enhance physical capabilities, it seems to create a form of collective intelligence that makes the infected far more dangerous than individual zombies. The sight of infected soldiers using military equipment with retained muscle memory suggests that some cognitive functions remain intact even after the transformation. At the motor pool, Sarah discovers a small utility aircraft that appears undamaged, a single-engine Cessna used for reconnaissance flights. The plane represents their only hope of reaching the Montana facility, but it can only carry 3 passengers maximum. Lisa Santos makes the heartbreaking decision to stay behind with her daughter, who has begun showing early signs of infection after being injured in the crash. The young mother's sacrifice exemplifies the impossible choices that define survival in this new world. As Sarah performs the pre-flight checks on the Cessna, Janet uses the base's emergency radio to broadcast warnings to any remaining survivor communities. The transmission includes information from the Project Lazarus documents about the infection's origins and the location of potential research facilities. The broadcast represents humanity's first organized response to the crisis, turning scattered survivors into a coordinated resistance network. The infected converge on the motor pool as Sarah starts the Cessna's engine, their enhanced hearing alerting them to the sound of potential escape. The aircraft's small size allows for a short takeoff, but the runway is partially blocked by debris from crashed military vehicles. Sarah must navigate between obstacles while infected personnel throw themselves at the moving aircraft, some clinging to the landing gear as they lift off. During the flight to Montana, Janet succumbs to internal injuries sustained in the crash. Her final words are a message for Sarah to deliver to the research facility: "Tell them we fought back. Tell them we didn't go quietly into that darkness." Her death leaves Sarah as the sole survivor of Flight 447, carrying the weight of 93 lives and the responsibility for humanity's potential salvation. The Montana facility appears intact from the air, its remote location having protected it from the initial outbreak. Sarah lands the damaged Cessna on the facility's emergency airstrip, where she's met by Dr. Elena Vasquez, the lead researcher on the countermeasure project. The Project Lazarus documents provide crucial missing data that allows Dr. Vasquez's team to complete their work on a treatment that can halt the infection's progression in recently infected individuals. Sarah's final transmission, broadcast from the Montana facility, reaches survivor communities across North America. Her message combines practical information about the infection with a rallying cry for organized resistance. This is Captain Sarah Chin, sole survivor of Flight 447. The infection was created by our own military, but it can be stopped. We have the knowledge, we have the cure, and we have the will to take back our world. To anyone listening, you are not alone. We are coming. The story concludes with Sarah leading the first organized mission to establish contact with other survivor communities, using her aviation skills to coordinate supply drops and evacuation flights. The aircraft that had been her prison becomes the tool of humanity's resurrection, carrying hope and healing to scattered populations. Her sacrifice of personal safety for the greater good transforms her from a pilot trying to save her passengers into the leader of humanity's fight back against the darkness. The final scene shows Sarah piloting a convoy of aircraft loaded with medical supplies and volunteer fighters, approaching the ruins of Denver where her nightmare began. The city skyline is broken and burning, but radio chatter indicates that organized groups of survivors are fighting back with the knowledge and resources Sarah's mission has provided. Her journey from commercial pilot to humanity's last hope is complete, but the real fight for civilization's survival has only just begun.